reusable straws. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel. This is Shipwrecked Library, my booktube dedicated to books. Instead of doing a long introduction, I'm just gonna get right down into the video. This is a booktube staple. I'm pretty sure everyone knows about these types of videos. I'm just doing my January wrap up. So in the month of January, I actually had a really good reading month. I only read 8 books, but I didn't read anything under a 3-star, and I actually only gave out 1 3-star, so everything I read was like 4 or 5 stars. Overall, it just felt really good in January. Like everything that I was reading, I was enjoying, and it was also just like a fun time, like as far as the beginning of 2021 goes. At least my reading was good. Let me know down in the comments if you like people doing this at the beginning of their wrap-ups, but I'm gonna give you some statistics. So of the 8 books that I read, 5 of them were physical books and 3 of them were audiobooks, and I didn't read any ebooks. I had 3 5 stars, 4 4 stars, and only 1 3-star. And my total average for the month of January was a 4.25, which is phenomenal. I think that's the best I've ever had in terms of reading since I started tracking like my monthly reading, unless I only read like 2 books a month, and both of them were 4-star. Why even mention that? The total page count for all the books that I read was 3,304 pages. The first book that I read in January was Frostbite by Rochelle Mead, and this is the second book in the Vampire Academy series. And I read this because of the VA read-along that I've mentioned in previous videos. I will actually put the graphic in here, unlike the last time that I didn't put the graphic in and I just looked silly. Here it is. So I can't tell you too much about this book because it is the second in the series, but basically it's about rich vampires going on a ski trip. And while that sounds really fun, it actually got really emotional and really intense. So I actually ended up enjoying this one a lot more than the first one. Not to say that I didn't like the first one. I gave the first one like a solid 3 stars, but I just ended up liking this one so much more. I thought that it was definitely more emotional and heavy at times, and the plot, while it sounds kind of silly, like it sounds like a fan fiction, a bunch of like vampires are going on a ski trip, it did have some really, really serious moments, and I think Rochelle Mead definitely opened up the world building in this book a lot more than in the first one, and you can really get a sense for how dystopic the people in this book are, like the dystopian lives that they lead. It's kind of just like dipping its toes into being a lot more deeper than just a fun, trashy YA novel series, and I really appreciate that. And I liked it a lot, so I ended up giving it 4 stars because my ratings are swayed purely by my emotions, what can I say? The next book that I picked up was Night Swim by Megan Golden, and I picked this up on audiobook. This is a story that is following a podcast host named Rachel. She is the host for a true crime series. We share a name. And it's told in dual perspectives of Rachel, the podcast host for the true crime series, and Hannah, who is a listener of the podcast, who calls in, or she doesn't call in, she writes to Rachel telling her the story of her sister's rape and murder 25 years prior. And the story is all about a current rape case that Rachel is following, as well as uncovering the story that happened to Hannah's sister in the past. So this is actually a really emotional book and kind of like a difficult one to read at times. I was a little taken aback by how realistic it is. This is very obviously based on the true story of Chanel Miller, who was Brock Turner's victim in the Brock Turner rape trial. She also has her own book called You Should Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I haven't checked it out yet, but I think I will, and I think anyone who reads this book or is interested in it should read her account too, just because it only seems right. But I was really taken aback by how gratuitously realistic this is. It was hard to read because it was so infuriating how true to real life it is. The victim blaming and everything that happens within the story to both Jenny, who is Hannah's sister from the past, and the current victim in the current plotline story. I didn't really care for the courtroom drama that was happening in the current time. I felt like it kind of took a backseat to Hannah's story, which is the one that Rachel is uncovering on the side of her current podcast episode. And most of the time I was kind of just wondering how that story was gonna go rather than the courtroom drama that was unfolding. To be fair, I don't really care about courtroom dramas anyway. That's not really my vibe. I don't really pick or read those. I heard a lot of good things about The Night Swim though, so I ended up picking it up on Scribd, and I don't regret it. I did end up giving it a 4-star. I will say that it is very triggering if you're sensitive to subjects like this because it doesn't hold back any punches. And while there's never any on-page assault, you do see the direct aftermath, like minutes after. It was a little intense. All right, so my third book in January was the 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is probably hands down one of the best, if not the actual literal best, first book in a series I think I've ever read. I was blown away by this book. It was fantastic on every single level I can think of. And fun fact, I'm actually going to be on Ridimus channel February 8th for a live show discussing this. It's gonna be like a spoilery book talk, I think. So if you've read this book and you're interested, you can definitely check her channel out. I'll link info in the description once I have it. We haven't like planned everything just yet, but just preemptively. For those of you who don't know, which I think this book is pretty popular, but still, if you haven't heard of the 5th Season yet, this is basically a fantasy series that is set in the like future apocalyptic setting where every 150, maybe more years or so, the world goes through a 5th season in which it pretty much destroys everything. Like water will become undrinkable, animals will turn into ravenous, terrible creatures. It's very interesting, but humanity has learned to live around these things and they have adapted to it sort of. And in the midst of everyone else, there are these magic wielders in a way called Erogenes who can control the earth. When you mix all of that together, it just brings in this really, really interesting magic element and also like cultural setting. This book is really, really heavy, especially on themes and complex topics. And when I say heavy, I mean that the very first chapter that you read is set from a character's point of view who just had her son murdered. And that's how the book opens. And it really grips you from the very beginning with that. It's so layered and it is really an exploration of trauma and grief and underneath all of that, survival in the best way that you can, and how sometimes survival is not a beautiful thing. It's horrible and grotesque and really difficult at the same time. The really unique thing about this book is that it is told from a second person point of view, some of it, not all of it. Just one point of view character is told from second person, which is the point of view where it's like, you went to the store, you bought a Coke, you paid with a 20, etc. And I think that some people are put off by that, but I would say have an open mind going into this if you do plan on reading it, because I thought it was going to be difficult to understand by the way so many people have talked about it, but I didn't find it confusing. I think if anything, the way Jemisin wrote this, it makes you feel so much more invested and engrossed in what's going on. And because it's not every single chapter, the entire book isn't second person, it's just every other chapter or so when you're in this certain character's point of view, I think it's done really well so that it breaks it up into nice, easy, digestible moments. The things that I loved most about this book was N.K. Jemisin's writing throughout the entire novel is so good. It is so digestible and easy to read, but it doesn't sacrifice anything in being easy to read. Her prose is still so beautiful. From this book alone, I think I'm probably gonna pick up anything that N.K. Jemisin writes. I can't believe that I put off reading this for so long because I wish I could go back in time and read this again. That's how good this was. I do think it's important to mention that this is not escapism fantasy. This isn't a light, easy read that you can like snuggle up on a winter day and enjoy and escape to the land of dragons and whatnot. This is very, very intense and has very, very important and complex themes in it that I think everyone should explore and read about, but it isn't something that I would necessarily is just like fun. I don't think I mentioned, I gave this 5 stars. Absolutely. So the next book that I picked up, my next audiobook was Winter Counts by David Heska Wanley Whedon. And this is a book about a man named Virgil Wounded Horse who lives on a Lakota Native American reservation and acts as that reservation's enforcer, which basically means any crimes that are committed that are not brought to court and are not given their legal justice, people pay Virgil to go and do his own form of street justice. So he's beating up rapists and murderers and abusers, etc. There is a budding drug problem that is coming onto the reservation that is soon brought to Virgil's attention, and then he, his ex-girlfriend, and his nephew get whirlwind thrown into this plot involving pretty much trying to take down these drugs and get them off of the reservation. So what appealed to me above everything else in this book was Virgil as a character. For a really long time, the only types of books that I was reading were noir crime books. Like, that's all I would read. I was very ingrained in those types of books. And so it almost felt nostalgic reading Virgil as a character again, because he is very classic, gritty noir. He is the very, I wouldn't say tropey, but the archetype of like down on his luck, kind of beat up, beaten down, chain smoking, carries a knife on him all the time, gets into a lot of fights, etc. But he is also sort of just like the everyman. Like, he really only wants to help people, but he is so filled with all this rage and injustice. And I loved him as a character. I didn't really connect to or care too much about all the other side characters, but I thought that Virgil as a main character was really interesting. When the author was writing it, it just felt very intimate. Like, you were very, very much so in Virgil's head. So the crux of the story is definitely the crime aspect. So they're always, I mean, the undercurrent of trying to find out who's selling the drugs on the reservation, wanting to oust them. But it's also about Virgil's identity crisis and the exploration of his relationship within his reservation into his own heritage and whatnot. It's very layered, and I think that my favorite part about this book was it was written so authentically. The author wasn't trying to write this to educate white people. It was just literally about how life is on the reservation, with no hand-holding or guiding you. And the acknowledgements, and I don't really ever read acknowledgements, but I did listen to the acknowledgements from the author in this one. He references a lot of other books that I think I would like to check out too, that he did for research on this particular reservation. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I loved the ending so much. I thought it was explosive and crazy, and it brought everything together in this wild way. But there was kind of like a lull in the middle that I was kind of just like, all right, can we get back to what's going on? Either way, I think it's great for people who are big fans of crime thrillers. I think this is one you definitely don't want to miss. And then my worst read of the month, it wasn't even the worst, but it was the not 4 or 5 star that I gave out, was Kiss Cut by Karen Slaughter. This is the second book in the what is it called? In the Grant County series that is primarily focusing on Sarah Linton, who is a pediatrician / coroner in a small county called Wilson, Grant. I don't know why I keep trying to call Wilson, whatever. So it starts with Sarah at a roller skating rink where a teenage girl is killed by Jeffrey, the other point of view character, when she is, the teenage girl, is trying to kill someone else. And unfortunately, when Sarah does the autopsy, a whole bunch of things come to light, and it is revealed that bad things are happening in Grant County. Who's surprised? In the last book, there was another serial rapist. Bad things just keep happening in this county. Anyway, this book, I was expecting it to be what it is. I mean, basically, Karen Slaughter books are novelized versions of I Spit on Your Grave. That's just what they are, and I've come to terms with that. And you kind of come to her novels knowing that. They push boundaries and your expectations, and you read them to feel uncomfortable, kind of grossed out, and like icky. And for some people, that's not their jam. For me, sometimes I like that kind of novel just because I grew up on horror movies anyway, so. But I hated the characters in this novel, which is surprising because I didn't hate them in the first book. It's following all 3 same characters from the first book, Blindsided: Sarah Linton, Jeffrey something, and Lena Adams. Lena, maybe that's not her last name. Her first name is Lena. And the thing is, all 3 of these characters are suffering from massive amounts of trauma. Like, they have been through hell and have come back, and they are currently still going through trauma with this new case. But they're horrible people, and I didn't like any of them. They're bad people. So Sarah is callous and cold and terrible to the one character who clearly needs the most help and is suffering the most, and it makes her very unlikable. Jeffrey is sexist and goes on a weird tirade in his own brain about his girlfriend not shaving her legs, which, ew. And then Lena, who arguably should be the character that has the most leniency because she has been through the worst, you have to sit through an entire chapter of her being homophobic. And it's like, I don't get it. I don't get it. So I will say that I recognize that maybe Karen Slaughter is doing something here. Maybe this is a series, so there's 4 or 5 books, I think. So she's probably going through a character arc with these characters, but that doesn't mean that I have to like reading that shit. And I don't like Jeffrey. I'm probably still going to continue on with the series because I am interested to see if Karen Slaughter does end up doing anything with these characters and either calling out these really awful traits that they have or changing them or what sort of arc they end up going through. I have no hopes for a happy ending because it's Karen Slaughter, but I'm just curious. I did end up giving it a 3-star because I will say that within her wheelhouse, within her genre, I think that Karen Slaughter is probably one of the best writers there are in the crime fiction world. This sort of gross subset of it, just because her writing is so digestible and so easy to read. And I finished this book in like 2 days on an ebook, and it takes me months to finish ebooks sometimes. But it's just fast-paced and easy to read, even though the content inside is not so easy. But it was still an enjoyable book, even though I didn't like the characters. I will say it's important to mention if you are going to end up picking up any Karen Slaughter books or you are interested in any Karen Slaughter books to read the trigger warnings. I'm not kidding when I say that she writes really graphic, terrible stuff, and you should be aware of that. Okay, on to the next one. So the 6th book that I ended up picking up was The Monster of Elendheim by Jennifer Geisbrecht, and I picked this up on audiobook, and this is my 2nd time reading it. This is about the little town of Elendhaven that is precariously perched, alliteration, over the ocean, and one day a monster crawls out of that ocean by the name of Johann and goes through this killing streak throughout all of Elendhaven, earning him the nickname of the Monster of Elendhaven. He then meets Florian, who is a monster in disguise, and the two team up for a revenge story that is out of this world. Can you guys tell I'm trying to be a little bit better about describing things? So first things first, I love this novella. It's only 160 pages. This is the 2nd time I've read it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars the first time, 5 out of 5 stars this time. It was just fantastic. It doesn't have a very high rating on Goodreads, which makes me wonder if maybe this book, it got like promoted to the wrong audience maybe, because this is not a happy book. There's definitely a lot of humor and lighthearted aspects in it, but it is still a very, very grotesque novel. And it is really about identity and revenge, and it's Lovecraftian and dark. And the characters of Johann and Florian are both bad characters. Well, they're not bad characters. They're good characters, but they're bad people. They're not supposed to really be, well, I think they're likable, but they're questionable, both of them. I mean, Johann is a straight up murderer. He kills people. And Florian is, like I said, questionable. He is essentially in the role of master for Johann, and he doesn't treat him necessarily well, and they have this weird, creepy romance going on. Either way, I think the standout part of this book is Jennifer Geisbrecht's writing. I thought her writing style was gorgeous, beautiful. I would read a million things that she writes. I would read another story of these characters. If she wanted to make this story into an 800-page novel, I would read it again. I think it's fantastic. The other thing that I really liked about this book is, even though it's only 160 pages, the world building in it is fantastic. Like, I feel like Elendhaven is a real place. I actually Googled it. I literally Googled Elendhaven to see if she had taken like inspiration from a Lovecraft story, because it is so deeply Lovecraftian and it's so dark and at the same time kind of like whimsical. It was just really good. I really recommend it for people who are fans of, like, say Hannibal or something like that, where you want to explore these darker themed romances. It's not a romance, really. They do have a relationship, but still. But people who aren't looking for a fun romantic, like, revenge story. It's gross, but I loved it. Okay. I don't know why I made those faces. Anyway, so the last book that I read was, oh no, this isn't the last book that I read. The second to the last book that I read was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. So I think that pretty much everyone on YouTube knows what this book is about, but if you don't, it's about a thieving crew that plots to throw over the Lord Ruler, who is the ruler of the entire empire that has control of the entire world, and he's basically this all-powerful evil guy that has oppressed the masses. This is actually my second time reading this. I read this for the first time in 2019, I think, and I really wanted to reread it again before I continued on with the trilogy and eventually continued on with Brandon Sanderson's writing. I love this book. I think it has fantastic world building. I think it has fantastic characters. I think this is one of those fantasy books you would read to someone who's like, I've never read fantasy before. What's a good fantasy I can get into? Because this is one of those books, one of those adult fantasies that honestly reads a lot more like young adult fantasy. And it has a very digestible world building. It's simple to grasp and easy to understand. Brandon Sanderson writes it in a way that's very blunt. And I also really liked the political machinations that were going on with this. I also thought those were very easy to grasp, like the way he has it set up. It's not really all that difficult, probably because there's only one ruler and he rules everyone and that's it. There's no questioning that. I think the only reason I didn't give this a 5 stars is because I do feel like there's something like missing from this novel, but I can't grasp what it is. Like something that I wanted out of this that I didn't necessarily get. I don't know. I do love the main character, Vin. She's one of the main characters so much. I think she's one of my favorite female characters in fantasy. Like, she is such a well-written character. The development that she gets throughout the novel it's so good. From page 1 all the way to the last page, she becomes such a different character. She really develops so well. And I haven't read anything else by Brandon Sanderson, but I've heard that his writing only gets better from this series, so I'm just really excited to continue on. All right, this is the actual last book. I read The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, and I cannot stop thinking about it. That's it. That's the review. I can't stop thinking about this book. I don't know how to give the plot to this book because I don't even know how to give the plot to the first book, and I also can't believe that there's 12 books after this book because so much happened in this book that what else is gonna happen? What else are you doing? Where is this going? And I don't know, but I can't wait to read it all. So basically, Wheel of Time is a huge epic fantasy series that is about good versus evil and the chosen one trope. And let me tell you, this book I gave 5 out of 5 stars. I really liked the first one. I gave it 4 stars. I will link my review of The Eye of the World, which is the first book in the series, down below if you're interested in learning just a little bit more about the series before you start, because you should think hard before starting a 14-book series. I liked this one so much more than the first one, and it's probably because I was just so much more emotionally invested in this one. I was actually, I'll put it on screen if I can, but I was blowing up the group chat talking about this. I was losing my mind. Like every 5 pages, I was just like, what is happening? What's going on? I can't handle this. I'm so emotional. I felt like my heart was just like by the end. I finished the book and immediately hopped on voice chat with like the friends, and I just loved it so much. And I'm so excited to get to The Dragon Reborn. Like, I can't stop thinking about it. I took a little bit of a break, and I think I'll start maybe like mid-month instead of trying to read it throughout the entire month because that was kind of tiring. I love her. Okay, that's it. That was it. That's all I read in the month of January. I read 8 books. How many books do you read? Was it a good month? Did you have a good month? How'd it go? Tell me about it down in the comments. All right, anyway, if you stuck around this long, I would love for you to leave me a comment. In all seriousness, getting comments is my favorite part of YouTube. Something about being able to reply to people. It's serotonin, baby. And also maybe like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.